Welcome back to the show. We did have that rare, very last minute guest cancellation today. I think we can say maybe partially related to coronavirus, although I guess we're not completely sure right now. But as a result, we're going to just take a few phone calls. It was impossible to find a replacement guest on short notice. So let's go right to the phones and start with our caller from the 603 area code. 603, possibly our is 603 New Hampshire? Is that it?
Yes, it is. Can you hear me, David?
Yes, I can.
Hey, great. Yeah, that is New Hampshire. I just had two very quick comments. Last questions I just wanted to get your feedback on. The first is they're both about coronavirus, unfortunately. But my first thing is, I agree with everything you've said for the most part. Obviously, Trump's handling has been pretty absurd. But the thing I keep hearing is that earlier action would have been better. If we had shut things down quicker, if we had, banned travel quicker, whatever. It just seems like that's a little bit unfair because, of course, that's true. You could always look back and say we should have done stuff more seriously, taken more swift action. It just hardly seems like an insight to me. I feel like at the time, if we had done more drastic action, shutting down the economy, banning all travel from China, something like that, back in January would have seemed like an overreaction. It just seems very difficult to know how things would have played out. So I'm curious to get a reaction on that. Just feeling like it's almost tautological to say.
Well, listen, you're right about one thing, which is it's always much easier to Monday morning quarterback, and in retrospect, it all seems so much clearer. So on the specifics of saying travel obviously should have been banned much earlier, it's not the fairest criticism. But the truth is that by the time Trump banned travel from China, the focus had really moved to Europe. And by the time Trump did that, a lot of people were late on that. It wasn't just Trump. I think the fairer criticism is the things that weren't done are things that the pandemic response team would have done, which Trump disbanded. And that includes you develop a test much sooner. South Korea did it. South Korea and the US had their first confirmed case within 24 hours. South Korea immediately developed a test, mass tested, isolated, and contact traced. They still don't have 200 deaths. And we had over 1,000 deaths yesterday alone. That's a fair criticism. That should have been done earlier. The mobilization and plan for the strategic stockpile of ventilators and masks, et cetera, Trump was way late on that. You need to early identify and start mobilizing those resources. So the travel ban criticism alone is some kind of 2020 hindsight to some degree that is not totally fair, but there's such a longer list of things that should have been done and would have if the pandemic response team hadn't been disbanded.
Yep. No, I totally agree. I think that's very well put. And then just one very quick other comment. I think the only other element that seems like a little bit of an unfair criticism, and again, just want to get your take on it, and then that's it there. It just related to the ventilators and the stockpiles and things like that you mentioned. I mean, we all know Bill Gates gave that TED talk on how unprepared the system was for a pandemic back in 2015. And obviously Trump's just blaming Obama. It's really just kind of a political stunt. It's not Obama's fault. It's kind of every president, I guess you could say, leading up to this point. But it does seem like that's something that doesn't come into play. I mean, the U.S. as a whole and the federal government seems very unprepared for something like this to manage from a federal level. And we obviously just have a very bad leader in charge now to be handling it. But it also seems like, again, that's just the other criticism I see that sometimes I see laid out very unfairly. It'll say something like, how did Trump not know, and keep the stockpiles so low? That also doesn't seem fair. So I just wanted to get your take on that, and then that's it. Thanks,
Well,
David.
again, I think that the size of the stockpile is 5% of the criticism. 95% is getting rid of the pandemic response team, not having a team in place to start strategically thinking about growing the stockpile starting in December, and mobilizing the stockpile where now you have states making requests. Some states get requests filled, some don't. So the size of the stockpile alone is only about 5% of the criticism. Even if you say that it's completely unfair, that still leaves another 95%.
Sure. Makes sense.
All right. Thank you so much for the call. I really
Thanks.
appreciate it. Great to hear from our friends, our friendly neighbors to the north, north, I guess, in New Hampshire.